force that all of the flying lead and iron could produce on a human body. So the Civil War bullet was lead, 58 caliber. It's a huge piece of lead. So when you're shot, it's not just the bullet that goes into you. It's the bullet. It's, let's say that you're shot through the strap on your cartridge box. It's the leather from the cartridge box. It's the dirty wool coat that you've been wearing for the last month. It's the dirty, sweaty, lice-ridden cotton shirt that you've been wearing, right? All of that goes into the wound too. So the wounds that they created were much larger than the ½ inch, and they didn't tear right through you. So where it hits bone, it tends to shatter bone. One soldier said it was like someone taking a 10-pound sledgehammer and hitting you as hard as they could. And even a modern surgeon, I mean, they're not going to have many options either if they need to act quickly than to take the limb. This is why amputation becomes, and most Civil War surgeons who were in the field became very adept at being able to amputate limbs. Our vision of what amputations during the Civil War has been completely distorted by movies. Well over 90% of amputations and major surgeries were done while the patient was insensible to pain. They were completely anesthetized, using ether or chloroform. This idea that you're wide awake and sensible during your amputation didn't really happen. If the limb was removed within the first 24 hours after the injury had been inflicted, the survival rate of the patient was much higher than if they waited to see what would happen or if they tried to treat the wound in another way. So really, what we think is sort of the barbarous acts of Civil War surgeons was actually a very calculated effort to save soldiers' lives.
Service records show that Patterson was paroled as a prisoner of war on April 20th, 1865. He took the amnesty oath a few months later, on July 17th, and returned to his family at Paradise Farm.
Because there had been so much fighting in Henrico County, farm fields had literally been turned into fortifications. That all had to be undone, right, and the land put back to the plow.
Just 5 years earlier, he had been on the cusp of success. Now, at age 39, he found himself on the brink of bankruptcy.
Life was very difficult after the war. For a former Confederate who one day may have been wealthy people and had lots of Confederate currency or invested a great deal of money in the Confederate war effort are now completely broke.
Patterson's financial hardship soon turned to personal tragedy. Margaret, his wife of 15 years and the mother of their 4 sons, died unexpectedly in 1866. Patterson did what he could to support his family. His training as a doctor came in handy, but when his neighbors couldn't afford his services, as they very often could not, he treated them free of charge. When the weather got cold enough, he cut ice from West Hampton Lake and carted it 8 miles to sell to customers in the city.
When the Civil War began, the Union Navy instituted a blockade of southern ports. And there were quite a few individuals who purchased ships or who owned ships and became, what we know today as blockade runners. So it would seem that Richard Patterson was involved in the blockade in some way because after the war, he received payment for goods that had been sold during the war, but the payment had been withheld because its delivery was uncertain. So instead of sending money that could have been captured back through the blockade, I guess the people on the other end held on to it with the expectation that when the war ended, they would be able to deliver them the money.
Patterson's fate took a dramatic turn in 1869 when he received a $9,000 payment from the blockade-run shipment, a fortune in post-war Virginia. He was back in business. Patterson liked to tinker with different varieties of leaf, trying to strike just the right blend. One day, his youngest son, 9-year-old Malvern, was helping him mix tobaccos. As legend has it, the boy handed a new blend to his father, who recognized its potential immediately. "That's a Lucky Strike," the elder Patterson shouted after sampling his son's recipe. One of the great American brands had been born. Patterson registered the Lucky Strike brand in May 1871. Lucky Strike made its name as a smoking tobacco for pipes. It would not be manufactured as a cigarette until 1916. Patterson's rejuvenated business was off and running. By 1879, he was employing 200 workers and making $350,000 worth of Lucky Strike and other products each year.
Really, tobacco is the engine of Richmond recovery from the Civil War. It's not overstating things to point out that when the rest of the country is gripped by the economic downturn of the 1870s, the Panic of 1873, it really lasts until 1879. Richmond's experiencing a tobacco boom, not just in cigarettes, but in plug and cut tobacco. That's propelling it and keeping it from experiencing the same kind of hardships that you're going to see throughout the rest of the country. 50 or more different tobacco manufacturers here in Richmond as we get towards the advent of the 20th century.
Richmond and tobacco, tobacco and Richmond, the two are born together, really. They're bound throughout their history. Richard Archibald Patterson is a distinct name for this region. He is a unique representation of what we think of as being a classic United States of America, born here, made himself, built a business story.
R.A. Patterson's tobacco enterprise was huge, one of the big four in Richmond after the Civil War. Certainly one of the largest in town, but there were others. All along the Richmond waterfront, you would have had that smell as you came downtown, would have just instantly hit you as a just sweet, sickly sweet smell filling your nostrils, reminding everyone that this is really a tobacco town.
In this universe of tobacco manufacturing, we have any number of people making the stuff. You had to distinguish yourself in some way, and that usually was through advertising and attractive packages. Patterson was certainly aware of that, and he was aware, too, of what we now call branding. But they're trying to sell an attitude. You feel more like a gentleman if you use this particular brand of pipe tobacco.
Well, the classic Virginia plug is a twisted roll of tobacco that you would buy and simply bite off a bit when you wanted to chew it. And of course, your cut plug was just that, only sliced up into pipe tobacco. Come in a little tin, and you could pinch out as much as you needed, fill your pipe, and smoke it that way.
In 1908, the R.A. Patterson Tobacco Company opened a 420,000 square foot facility. It could manufacture 12 million pounds of products in a single year, up to 1/3 of the total output of Richmond's tobacco industry. A story in the Times-Dispatch that year declared the city to be the tobacco center of the universe. Patterson loomed large at its very heart.
When we think about Lucky Strikes today, we think about cigarettes. We think about the classic red circle on the white pack of cigarettes we've all seen during the 20th century. But in R.A. Patterson's lifetime, Lucky Strike was a pipe tobacco. Now, Lucky Strike was one of several varieties that R.A. Patterson offered. He offered grape and tuxedo. Some were plug tobacco, which was chew tobacco. Some were pipe tobacco. American Tobacco is producing R.A. Patterson Lucky Strike for several years after their acquisition of Patterson's Tobacco. So clearly it was a name that was recognized and something that they could bank on. Though they eventually replaced the name, they would remove Patterson's name and replace it with the now famous "It's Toasted" on the Lucky Strike carton. And the company resisted making cigarettes until after his death. So it's sort of ironic to think about that when we think about Lucky Strikes, R.A. Patterson never saw a Lucky Strike cigarette.
Patterson had left his post as president of the company in 1903, retiring to his estate at Reveille. He had acquired the historic property located in Henrico County a few miles east of Paradise Farm in 1869. He had remarried the previous year. He began acquiring property in Henrico to the limit of his means, in the words of his second son, Archibald. He also began pushing for better roads. Patterson made road improvement the centerpiece of his service on Henrico's Board of Supervisors. He represented the Tuckahoe District from 1883 to 1891, including 2 years as chairman. The Times-Dispatch recognized him as a pioneer in highway improvement who took special pride in good roads.
I think the interesting thing about him is, in addition to being a shrewd businessman and successful in the tobacco industry, he was also a civil servant. He felt a need to serve his community.
He had a vision. He believed that Richmond would expand farther west, and he began buying up land left and right in the western part of what we would call the near west end of Richmond, anticipating the growth of a great metropolis. And perhaps Richmond might have grown larger, bigger than it did, had tobacco had formed a different kind of relationship with industry. When Allen and Ginter wanted to mechanize the production of cigarettes, a guy named Albert Bonsack out of Lynchburg, Virginia, and he devised this cigarette rolling device that produced like 12,000 cigarettes in an hour. Ginter relied on young women rolling his cigarettes by hand. The machine was kind of bulky. It was new technology. He wasn't really sure of it. He didn't want to put his ladies out of work. So those rights were sold. Bonsack sold the rights to James Buchanan Duke of Durham, North Carolina, and that is why there is a Duke University and not a Ginter College. Ginter did pretty well, became to be one of our great prolific philanthropists, as did Mr. Patterson. He did quite well himself, too, and he was one of these tobacco millionaires. But the problem was, when Duke organized American Tobacco, he wanted to do so in Virginia. But the Virginia General Assembly would not allow him to incorporate here, perhaps because he basically absorbed Ginter's business. And so he went to New York, or New Jersey and New York, and all those profits from American Tobacco, which later ended up being split up because of antitrust laws, but all of those profits went to New York. So while we were the labor in Richmond, manufacturing the cities, and the men who ran the actual firms, they made quite a bit of money. But the city that Mr. Patterson was envisioning, maybe perhaps this New York City-sized place, didn't get its boost through tobacco in that way. In other ways, certainly.
Patterson's public service extended to other areas. While serving on Henrico's Board of Supervisors, he also spent 4 years on the Board of Directors of the Virginia State Penitentiary. His business acumen reached beyond the tobacco industry. In the late 1880s, he served as president of the West Hampton Park Railway Company and keyed the extension of an electric line to the area. In 1889, he was elected first president of the Savings Bank of Richmond. He served the bank in that capacity for more than a decade. He relished moments with his family, which had grown with the addition of 2 children by his second marriage. The best father in the world was ever near to encourage and help, according to son Archibald. Patterson was 87 when he died in 1912, leaving a $1 million estate to his family and a legacy of service to his community. His front-page obituary described him as the leader for a generation in the Virginia tobacco industry. A typical self-made man who had made his way up from obscurity without assistance. While that might not be entirely accurate, it also may not be so important. Archibald's words paint a more lasting picture. He was a big man in every sense of the word. His vision was prophetic. No one in this community ever stood higher for honor, integrity, and good citizenship than did Dr. Patterson.